Dan Clark Audio is releasing a new headphone right about now. It's called the Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO. And as its name might suggest to you, the NOIRE XO is the open back counterpart to what has been perhaps Dan Clark Audio's most successful headphone to date in terms of sales and community response. I'm talking about the closed back NOIRE X. Perhaps obviously then, the O in NOIRE XO stands for open or open back. Now, Dan Clark is usually very enthusiastic about every one of their new headphone model releases, but in our many private conversations throughout the NOIRE XO's development, he seemed particularly fired up about this one. First of all, because they've made an open back with outstanding bass extension and impact, and also because it's one of very few headphone designs, and especially when it comes to open back headphones, that actually tracks the industry standard Harman Target curve, and we'll have more on that in my conversation with Dan. Now, about that conversation, while Dan and I have made a tradition of meeting in person for our discussions for these videos, whether he visits HeadFi HQ or I go out to their headquarters, neither of us was able to make the trip this time around. So we had a discussion about the new Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO via video chat, and here it is. Dan Clark, thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so usually you're here at HeadFi HQ when we do these things. Like we do it in person typically, but this time we're doing it remotely. And the one thing I think everybody knows when you and I are sitting together on a video, whether remotely or together, is there's a new headphone to talk about. And today there's a new Dan Clark Audio headphone to talk about. So I'm gonna show it. This is the Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO. Did I get the name right? I did.
Yep.
That's O for open. So the NOIRE X, the closed back, the one that came out before this, this was the headphone just previous to this one, has been a huge hit. Am I wrong? Because it just seems like they're selling like crazy.
Oh, yeah. No, that's been the best-selling new product we've ever done, and it has easily become our most popular headphone.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not surprised. And it's a known factor. Everybody, I think, knows about the NOIRE X. Now the NOIRE XO, the open back counterpart. Tell us what the objective was to this. I mean, because you really did want to make the NOIRE X has been such a success. You wanted to make an open back counterpart for it.
Yeah. Uh, the highest priority that we actually had was to try to come up with an open back headphone that actually had a very clear relationship to the closed back version. And in the past, we've gotten close. Stealth and
Yeah.
Expanse were close. There was a family resemblance, but nothing like we've accomplished with this NOIRE X and NOIRE XO. The two headphones measure almost the same within a tiny variance, though the subjective experience of the headphones is somewhat different. And that has a lot of benefits for us as a manufacturer, but more importantly for the consumer, because what we've begun to do is actually introduce a real high degree of predictability in the sound experience that we're able to deliver.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. I won't get into the guts of it, the details of it, so that we don't make this a video, just about measurements. But we have to at least touch on that. So they do measure similarly, quite similarly.
Yes,
And I'm talking about the NOIRE X and the NOIRE XO. But like you said, they don't sound exactly the same, although they definitely sound of a family. I would
yes.
say they're closer than the Stealth and Expanse are to each other. But these to me sound richer in tone at the bottom, especially than the NOIRE X. Tell me if you hear it the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. The bass response actually measures in such a way that you think the NOIRE X might have more bass, but perceptually the NOIRE XO feels like it has a little more weight to it.
Yes, I agree. For me personally, but that's my taste, though, right? You know that I tend to favor richer sounding headphones, and between the two, gun to head, if I had to choose, I would take the open, the XO. They're so good, in my opinion, that I've been listening to them compared to, I would say, probably still my favorite overall headphone from Dan Clark Audio to date, which is the Dan Clark Audio Stealth, which is your closed back flagship. And I have to weigh in use case there because, if you're gonna, you and I were having this discussion a little bit earlier. If you're gonna choose one headphone, right? A closed back headphone gives you a little bit more use case flexibility. But just trying to think of sound alone, like part of the reason I love the Stealth is I perceive some richness to it. It's to me it's on the well within my range of neutrality, but with some richness. Um, this I actually kind of hear the same way.
Hmm.
And so I would not expect something that is this much less expensive than the Stealth to to be something I could compare to it that closely. But you know who does this all the time? Sports car companies, right? As the years go by, even their lower end models start performing closer to the flagships of years past. You know what I'm saying? Is that a bad analogy? But I think you get where I'm going. So let's talk about that.
Well, technology always advances, as do our skills. And of course, what we try to do, there are different ways to design products, of course, and some people will pick a price point and try to de-feature products to make it so that there's differentiation between a lower price point product and a higher price point. And we explicitly do not do that. We've always tried to pack in the most performance that we can at a given price point. And this headphone really reflects that. It's our commitment to doing the absolute best we can within the constraints of the platform and price versus trying to defeature to meet a price point. And that I'm really pleased that you enjoy the headphone that much, and that it can compete or compete with your affection for our more expensive offering is great. Um,
Yeah, you're not surprised though, because I mean, I'm going to say this: you're enthusiastic about every headphone you release, but for this one, I felt like there was a little more than normal, and your normal level is already very enthusiastic to begin with. But I felt like there was a little bit more for these, as a as we headed to the launch. Why? I mean, if I'm correct.
well, first off, I can almost answer a question with another question, which is how many open headphones have you ever seen that actually can match the Harman Target, especially in the bass curve?
Yeah, an open back headphone, yes, much more challenging,
Yeah.
especially given
And
the shape,
so
the contour. Yeah.
when I got in the industry, I think there was a preference that people had, and a default assumption that open headphones were better. And as the Harman curve came along, that began to give headphone makers, especially those of us who do closed headphones, a tool that allowed us to have a target to move toward, and one that had a bass profile that technically is very difficult for open headphones to realize. And so one of the things that I love about this headphone is that we actually pulled that off. Not only did we pull it off, but we also managed to pull it off in such a way that this headphone sounds very similar to the closed sibling. And
Right.
uh, sure, if you need only one headphone and you want, one headphone, you should probably pick a closed headphone because you can use it anywhere. But if you are in the market for an open headphone, this is the first time you've had an open headphone from us at an affordable price point that gives you the tonality that you would hope for from a high-end headphone, but does it with the sound stage and dynamics of an open back.
Yes. You did a beautiful job giving that impact and leaving the mids be. Like, the mids are still clean, very linear neutral, but there's some nice richness down low where I want it. So you did a beautiful job with that. I don't wanna make this a video about measurement solely, but I do wanna touch on something. Uh, you started using the Brulin Care 5128. I believe that, the Noir X and now the XO were the first headphones you had where you had 5128 in your labs, um, through their development. How important has that been with these headphones, and how important was that to getting them to be so close as you did between the closed and open counterparts?
The answer is it was tremendously beneficial to the R&D process. When we were measuring headphones with the Gross 45 CA, there was a tendency to see peaks and dips in the response as you measure them that did not line up to what you heard with peaks and dips when you were doing technical assessments of the headphone. And the 5128, we have not only better alignment to what I'm hearing, but all of us who are involved in the tuning process find a better correlation. When I hear a peak on the see a peak on the 5128 measurement, I can hear it. And that has taken an order of magnitude of reduction in the time that we invest in tuning the acoustic metamaterial.
Yeah, so that to me is one of the more interesting discussions we've had, since you brought the 5128 into the lab. You were very upfront, at least with me, about, what it was doing for you. So I wanted to at least touch on that in this
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, no, it's a
And it does.
hugely beneficial tool. And, the other part of it, and this will come out, I'll be posting this in the next week or two, and you may have some of this to share as part of this video, but we also have done a mapping of the Harman curve to the 5128. So we now have a well-defined target for the 5128. And the neat thing about it is we think that it's very accurate in that if we measure a difference between how a headphone complies to the Gross 45 CA Harman curve, we will find those almost exact same differences on the 5128 with that same headphone. And so that tells us that we've got the targets pretty well mapped out.
Right. But in your target, you're actually finding that what you'd want, say, versus how a direct port from the original Harman target might actually, correct me if I'm wrong though, require more treble energy up top
Yeah.
than is being represented by a direct port of Harman. Am I wrong or am I right? I think that's what you showed me.
Yeah, that's correct. The original Harman curve, and I'll try to be as succinct as I can on this, but the original Harman curve was based on a custom ear that was developed by Sean Olive as part of the process. That was a softer version of the old Gross ears that originally came with a 45 CA. Now that's a ear that has a smaller size to it, I think, than the anthropomorphic ears that they subsequently released, and a little different geometry. And as a result, it has a tendency to underestimate the high frequency energy that it's capturing. So, for example, if you have the 45 CA Harman curve that was done with those softer ears that are called the welty ears, that curve will look like this. But you'll see that a lot of headphones track above that curve, above 10 kilohertz, and I think that that's because people were hearing that that was too rolled off. And if you switch to the KB5000 ears, the curve will split like this, and you'll start to get a little more treble energy. How much more? Nobody can say exactly because we don't have those modified ears that Sean used. So there's basically a built-in measurement error to the Harman curve above 10 kilohertz. We tried to factor that out when we ported to the 5128, and in fact, our 5128 profile, when we did the mathematical translation, came through with about 3 to 5 dB more high frequency energy than we saw with the original Harman. And so I think that that's good measure to reality. And the other thing is that the high frequency response that we calculated out with our derived Harman on the 5128 also mapped pretty well to the diffuse field response of the 5128, which gives kind of an independent confirmation that that is probably a correct alignment.
Right. Actually, another interesting data point or set of data points might be Knowles's research, which was actual new preference research to build upon, if you will, the Harman in-ear target, where they let people dial in their treble preference, and what they found was people preferred more treble than the Harman in-ear target. In other words, that it would also be consistent, even, and that was a preference study, like with kind of what you're surmising here, what you're kind of arriving at. So that's interesting. So in a way, that's kind of validation as well. But so that's in here. I like the approach that you're doing, which you've been doing since the stealth, then with the 45 CA, which was again, you've been very unabashed about the fact that the Harman target was something that you used as a sort of a point of reference, but not, it wasn't like where you had to be, but it was kind of a nice point of reference. And I've said before, if I was starting a headphone company today, which I'm not going to do, I never built anything in my life as far as physical products go. But if I was going to, in theory, hypothetically, I would probably start with the Harman Target. I've said this before,
Mhm.
and then tune to taste, kind of a tolerance band, if you will, right, around the Harman Target, and then tune to taste. And I feel like that's what you've done, and you've come up with some fantastic headphones as you've done this. And now you're trying to do something with an even more precise instrument with the 5128 with your ported over Harman Target. I think this is all very interesting stuff. I'm going to look forward to seeing, what you continue to do with that. But these are a wonderful result, as yeah, as were the closed ones, the Noir X before it. So kudos to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love that. This is the XO is just it's a gorgeous headphone for me to listen to. I really love it. It's got such a natural vibe to it, and the other thing that it really does to my ear is it's just got a lifelike sound. Um, what I mean by that is like I feel a tremendous sense of presence to instruments. Strings have a lot of body to them. Vocals are very rounded, like there's a person there. My wife actually, the first time she listened to it, pulled the headphone off as she was listening to Get Lucky, and she said, I don't even know how to describe this, but it feels like it's not a recording of a person so much as a person. And when you hit that with somebody who's spent a fair amount of time listening to headphones, that's like high praise. And that was really what I was trying for. It's just a wonderful headphone, and uh, like it's really unique to me that it can do a large scale orchestra really, really well and sound just rich and deep and layered. And then I can throw in some electronic and it has the feeling like I'm at a festival with 20 bass bins around the stage.
I no, I agree with you. I think these are fantastic. Like I said, I find them to be, like I said, when I'm talking about them in the same, kind of in the same context, with the stealth, with no regard for price. I think that's saying something because the stealth is one of my reference closebacks, period, at any price. So that's saying something about these. I want to talk very quickly about the aesthetic,
Hmm.
because you guys always do pay a lot of attention to how your products look. With the Noir X, you went with what is almost, a completely blacked out look, this murdered out look. It's glossy though, and I love the way it looks. Um, this you went to, I mean, honestly, this feels kind of like a sibling of the Expanse. It's unmistakable with the grill.
Hmm.
Can we talk about that grill? Because I know we've talked about it with the Expanse, but for anybody who hasn't seen that, this is worth discussing.
Sure. The aesthetic of it is fairly straightforward, but I don't know how well that'll come through in the lighting of and resolution of a camera. But
Right, we'll show
basically,
pictures.
there's a complex geometry to this because the headphone itself, of course, has that ear shape. And what we've tried to do is create a mathematical function that maps tapered cells smoothly throughout the whole radius of that. And so it's a pretty complicated mathematical function. I think it ended up having like five, maybe six different functions in it to generate that without any huge discontinuities. And it's really neat. It's kind of based on the principles of generative design, where we're trying to key it off of things that you find in nature or life. And in this instance, I think probably the closest visual analogy might be a cross section of a plant or a tree, where you have the xylem and the phloem and the cells kind of spreading out as the radius of the plant changes, changing in their orientation and their cell size. And it's kind of neat to have those little biological cues. I think it makes things feel more accessible and engaging.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me was like something almost like insect eyes,
Mhm.
dragonfly wings. But then you hit me with an even better. That's a better analogy actually, because it does. As someone when I was a kid, I used to use a a microphone scope a lot to look at anything and everything I could put on a slide. And you're right, it does
Yeah.
actually look like the cross section of certain plant structures. That's pretty cool. But, yeah, so I really enjoy these. They're very comfortable as well. Most of your headphones, I think all of them, since you started kinda going to this newer headband design, I found to be exceptionally comfortable. And you always get the tension right on the stretch headband, which is extremely important. lest the headphones start to levitate off my ears. I don't have that issue
Right.
with these at
But
all.
you don't want them to
So you
crawl up or drop down.
no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. You've done a beautiful job with that too. So these I'm very, very excited about. I'm going to talk more about my subjective impressions um, separately. But again, I hear these as well within my range of neutrality with the richness that I want with that, and extremely resolving. What is the final price, by the way? Do you know?
12.99.
Yeah.
That's the
So
US price.
that's yeah, that's fantastic. So these are going to be okay. You know as well as I do, these are going to do at least I think as well as the Noir X's. So congratulations in advance.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
I think it will maybe, to me, this feels like it has the potential to do even better than the NOIRE X. Um, because it's such an accessible and easy to listen to headphone that plays so well with so many genres. Um, and it's done at such an accessible price point, but also it's a bit of a unicorn in among open headphones in that it is able to project that tonality that it has that's so difficult to realize without the benefit of a cup to provide bass reinforcement.
Well, no, the one okay, this is something I need to say about you, Dan. I've said it in other videos, and I'm going to say it here. One of the things I've appreciated about you and continue to appreciate about you is your passion for what you're doing in terms of engineering, trying to make better things is something that uh, I, I don't know anybody. I can't say I know anybody that's more passionate in that regard. Maybe but I don't know that you could be more passionate than that. Dan will write me in the middle of the night or in the evening with measurements and things to discuss routinely. You're always trying to push, and ever since I've known you, what you do to invest in your company and invest in your lab to make things better. Um, always impressed me. I think I used that analogy earlier, and it does. You see this again with sports cars, right? You'll have performance cars that over the years just get better and better, and then when you compare them to their flagships of the past, right, they're actually very comparable because of what was learned or technology, like you said, and that's what you guys do. And like you say, you don't try to. What was the word you said
D
um,
feature.
defeature it,
Yeah.
to meet a price point. You're really trying to make the best thing possible at any given price point, period. So, kudos to you on these, Dan Clark. The Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO. So, I just want to say thanks to Dan for taking the time. I know you're a pretty busy guy, no question. Um, and I need to get back out to your labs. So, for anybody who's had the privilege of visiting Dan Clark Audio, what a facility full of energetic, passionate people and a pretty darn cool lab and a lot of 3D printers. There are a lot of 3D printers over there, uh, and a
We
lot of
do a
3D
lot of
printed
work with
things.
3D printers and also
Yes.
lasers. Yeah, we've got we since you were last here, we put in a really large laser.
Oh, really? All right, I'm gonna have to check that out. But yeah. So, anyways, Dan, thanks for taking the time today to talk about the Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO and launching right around the time people are watching this. Like I was just saying in the chat, I do admire greatly how Dan and his team are driven to constantly improve their processes, their technologies, many of them proprietary technologies, the research and development lab, and so their headphones. Like we discussed, they don't defeature or reduce technology in their headphones to meet a price point. Again, I think lately their newer, more affordable models, due to all of this, end up becoming actual rivals to their longer standing flagships. For example, like we discussed in the video, the NOIRE X and NOIRE XO are the first Dan Clark audio headphones that were developed entirely after they'd added the Brulin Care 5128 to their lab. And with the 5128, they were able to make more accurate, more granular adjustments and changes to their AMTS modules for these headphones for fine tuning. Also, as with the NOIRE X, the NOIRE XO's driver is designed around Dan Clark Audio's new, updated, and improved NOIRE audio planar magnetic driver, this new driver being significantly more rigid than its predecessor. This new generation driver also has superior unit-to-unit consistency, reduced distortion, improved reliability, and smoothed frequency response. So now let's talk more about my subjective impressions of the new NOIRE XO because, like Dan, I'm actually very excited about this headphone. Why? Because, like I said earlier, and as we discussed a bit with Dan, it's an open back headphone with nice bass impact and presence. The NOIRE XO has excellent bass extension and tuning. Dan mentioned that it's difficult to meet the low-frequency contour, that transition from the mid-range to the rising bass, with an open-back headphone, and the NOIRE XO does exactly this. I want to be clear, though, the NOIRE XO is not a bass-head audiophile headphone, but I think it could still satisfy the audiophiles who are bordering on audiophile bass heads, but not quite there, and I think it may be fair to say I'm one of those. Compared to the closed-back NOIRE X, the NOIRE XO, as Dan and I also discussed, may measure very similarly in terms of frequency response, but I hear it is just mildly more impactful and present in the bass, which I think actually has to do with it being open-back. I'm not going to delve into this topic here, but it may be a discussion worth having. If you watch Sennheiser's Beyond the Curve video episode that I guest hosted from Munich High End last year, I discussed this topic a bit with Sennheiser. I'll put a link to that video in the forum post accompanying this video on HeadFi's forums. Now, as for its mid-range, the NOIRE XO's mids are clean, extremely clean and linear. This is not a headphone characterized by rich mids, but instead possessing of a neutral bell-clear mid-range. Not thin, not thick, but right down the middle. The NOIRE XO's treble is also super clean and extended and passes all my no imparted sibilance tests, as I'm very sensitive to sibilance in terms of my preferences, and the NOIRE XO passes my sibilance tests with flying colors. In terms of imaging, the NOIRE XO, perhaps not surprisingly, images wider than its closed-back sibling, the NOIRE X, which as closed-back headphones go, images beautifully. To my ears, while the NOIRE XO isn't the widest imaging open back I have here, it's wide enough for me and perhaps more importantly to me coherent in this regard, with sonic image objects well placed and appropriately layered. While Dan and I didn't specifically talk about the pro audio use case, if you haven't figured this out from what I've described so far, the NOIRE XO and also the NOIRE X would make fantastic studio monitor headphones. Now, because I've been on a rather busy travel schedule the past couple of months, I haven't yet had the chance to run a full suite of measurements with the Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO. But here are measurements from Dan Clark Audio of the NOIRE XO compared to the alpha version of Dan Clark Audio's Harman Target ported for the 5128. I say it's an alpha version as they're still refining this target. By the way, now shown alone here is Dan Clark Audio's alpha version Harman Target, developed by doing differential measurements of a group of headphones on the two relevant couplers, then applying the difference to the Harman 2018 curve. As Dan mentioned in the chat, you can see that the Dan Clark Audio version of the Harman Target for the 5128 calls for more treble energy than Harman's does, which I also think is likely to be more in line with actual preferences. So that's the Dan Clark Audio NOIRE XO, and it should be releasing right around the time we put this video up. Thanks again to Dan Clark for taking the time to chat with us about their new headphone, and thanks to you for watching this episode of HeadFi TV. Now, please make sure to hit the like button, and please also make sure to subscribe to our channel for future content like this. I'll see you guys on the forums at headfi.org, and hopefully also in person at our CanJam events.